It is good to be together. Thanks for coming, for being here physically present, as well as those that are watching online, because we are being streamed. But this morning we hoped to share a little bit about the highlights and some of the time that we had, as many, 25 of us, 26 if you include a bus driver, journeyed down to Montgomery and Tuskegee and Selma, Alabama. So we wanted to share some highlights today, and our time will be a bit of pictures. And look at the stalwart crew right up here, right? And that's Calvary members as well as Grace St. Luke's. And so we're going to show you some pictures as well as some videos, because understandably, but part of the trickiness too in conveying some of the time at EJI, Equal Justice Initiative, in the museum there, and the memorial there, and the sculpture park there, is that we can't take a lot of pictures. So that is to honor folks. It's to for a variety of things like that. So we're going to have 2 short videos, because everybody likes a video, right? To also share a little bit about the time. And there are folks here. One of them's just coming in. Morning, Melanie. Who were on pilgrimage, and I've invited them to be ready, willing, and to share as they feel called about some of the highlights and things that have stood out to them. There are folks that are not here who have written to me, and I have them with me, reflections that they wanted to make sure were heard, and they are here in spirit but are traveling. So, and then we'll have time for questions and anything else that we want to do on this time. I have put, before we have our prayer, I have put, and saw some of y'all looking at on this table, some things that came from the pilgrimage, and I'll share, I might need a reminder, to share a little bit about that. There's a race card over there. There's images. There's also questions that are at the museum that were asked in order to qualify to be able to vote in a time of voting rights and poll taxes. So there's lots to kind of look at that way too. So we hope to kind of inundate you with all powerful things to kind of help you imagine what took place, and perhaps to invite you to think about a pilgrimage for you at some point. Okay? Well, with that, I invite us to take a breath, if you will, a breath in and out with me. And then our prayer comes from what we will hear and have been sharing in our prayers of the people, a prayer from Ghana, and adapted for Celebrate Life at the General Council there for World Alliance Churches. O Christ, in our journeys from comfortable consciences and practices, inspire in us ever-deepening commitments to your justice and outreach. For in God's economy, no one is expendable, and we believe in equity. Grant that we may become bold in love. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, good folk, here are our folk. I'm going to name them. I'm going to name our Calvary folk as well as our Grace St. Luke's folk. We had Stephen and Kathy Moore, Tim Hubner, Melanie Rock, Ellen Rolfs, Mary Layton, Christine and Carol Todd, Catherine Bush, Mary Fortin and her husband Ricky Fortin, Susie Sutton, Matthew Seltzer, Nancy Manier, Allison Whittle, who did not wind up coming, and she cannot be replaced, but wonderfully so, Carol Ann Mallory got to take her place. Andy Nix and Nikki Soule, Betty and George Johnson, Bill Etnier and Michael Lonesome Etnier, John McQuiston, Ann Clemens, who was our tour guide, and then our bus driver, Matthew, who was quite a character on our trip. Mm-hmm. So this is the crew, and this is taken outside the sculpture park, and we're going to hear a little bit about that. But just a brief overview of the time. We departed on Thursday, the 18th, and went to Montgomery and had a good dinner and got rested up, because on Friday we went and visited the New Legacy Museum, and from there went to the Freedom Monument Sculpture Park, and then we concluded with dinner and gathered each night for Compline. And we have our Compline leaflet there, and it was a compilation of some thoughtful ways in which Compline is, but using multiple sources, particularly sources from Cole Author Riley, who has written a fabulous, stunning liturgy book called Black Liturgies. So we used some of the readings from there, and it seemed to work well for our time. On Saturday, we woke up, had a good breakfast at that hotel, and traveled to the Peace and Justice Memorial Center. And we're going to see that and the memorials there. And then the remaining time, we traveled around and looked at things in Montgomery, sites around civil rights sites and such, and we're going to show you pictures there. And those that wanted to also journeyed not far from Montgomery to Tuskegee, Alabama, to not only see the campus, the university there, but also the national site where the airmen were, and the hangar, which is a national park, and many found that compelling too. And then when we journeyed back on Sunday, we had a really strong service at Church of the Holy Comforter. No, Good Shepherd. Good Shepherd. I've got Holy Comforter on the mind. Good Shepherd and Larry Yarborough and that wonderful congregation welcomed us as a part of their hospitality and energy that they do as their ministry for those that are coming to Montgomery to listen, to learn, and to grow. And then we made our way to Selma, and we walked the Edmund Pettus Bridge and honored that historic site and all that has taken place there before making our way back up to Memphis. So that's a brief overview. How was that, y'all who went? Fair? Yep, okay. All right, so with that, and I have lots of people helping me with technology. Let's see if I can. Here we go. I'm just going to click this, Jeff. Is that right? Okay. So before I do, I'm going to set up this video. This is the Legacy Museum from Equal Justice Initiative, the museum, and then we'll see the memorial. And it was my first time to see the expanded version of this. It had been in a smaller space when I went a number of years ago when I took a group to, from the cathedral. But it is quite impressive. And yep, we're going to let folks share as they feel called and such. But I wanted to set it up like this. This comes from Brian Stevenson. There's work and journey for all to create a better future. It's hard to confront these uncomfortable truths at times, and it takes courage to learn the truth. But when we do, we open doors that permit justice and healing and transformation. The museum is dedicated to creating a society where the children of our children are no longer burdened by the legacy of slavery, no longer presumed dangerous or guilty, no longer haunted by racial inequality wherever they go. But to get to that society, there's a role for all of us to play. So we are invited, all of us, to come hear sounds, to see, to learn, so that all of us can advance justice in the places that we go back to, where we live and breathe in our cities and communities and neighborhoods. This museum is to honor the lives and memories of 10 million Black people enslaved in America. And it celebrates their courage and resilience and lifts up the love and triumph that is there. I couldn't say it any better, so I just wanted to read that, okay? I can't hear it. I think we've lost the sound, Jeff. Hit play.
I grew up in Alabama, surrounded by monuments and memorials celebrating the Confederacy, and very little acknowledging the history of slavery or presenting that history from the perspective of enslaved. I grew up in Alabama, surrounded by monuments and memorials celebrating the Confederacy, and very little acknowledging the history of slavery. I grew up in Alabama.
So that gives you a taste of the museum itself and the purpose. And I'm wondering if there are folks who are here who are on pilgrimage who want to reflect or name something that in that time at the museum itself, before we get to the memorial, anything that comes to mind or that you want to share about.
So mine's a little bit general, but I'll just say that I was blown away by how well done that museum is and how much there is. I mean, we could have spent days in that museum itself. It was really just so impressive, and it was just finished in 2018, so it is extremely up to date, just amazingly impressive in a way that I really was not prepared for. I just didn't. I mean, it is world class, does not do it justice at all, and so it was really a great opportunity to see all the aspects throughout our history. It doesn't just focus on slavery or lynching, or, it really brings it up to present day, including a really great art installation at the end that's really, really moving. So I would encourage anybody who has the opportunity, please go. You will not be disappointed.
Thank you. Others? Melanie?
Thanks. I echo everything that Nikki said. But I don't think in my life, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional here in this space. Museum is not really the right word, I don't think, because it aims at transforming the people that experience it.
Well said. Yep. Technology is limiting, and that word itself. There are holograms. There are ways to interact with computers. There are individual stories of persons who are incarcerated that you sit face to face with, and you hear their story. It's like you're meeting with them in an incarceration center, and you hear their story, you hear their poetry. It's incredibly personal and real and individual. And the connections through video, through art, especially Nikki mentioned there at the end, is incredibly healing and beautiful, because at the heart of this is to celebrate a people and their resilience, and to honor the history, and to say that it does not go unseen, and it's important to know it so that we can better know how to move forward. That's what I would add. Anything else? Somebody who didn't go on the pilgrimage?
I was fortunate to recently go to the Charleston International African American Museum, which is even newer. And the thing that was so special about it was it took you back to Africa. It took you into the lives of these people before they became enslaved. And you really saw the history through the art and the power of who these people were, and made you connect to their individual stories, so that you knew they were not a number. They were a human being, just like you. And that was so powerful.
So that was in Charleston. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to keep us moving and then show pictures of the EJI National Memorial for Peace and Justice. This is not far from the museum, but these are markers. Markers that mark every county where there has been known recorded lynchings. And lynchings were very public, and they were advertised. So in some ways, that is a gift to know all of them, because we know many because they were advertised in newspapers, but they sadly became almost carnival-like and spectacle-like in the gatherings and folks that came to watch. So it's incredibly artistic, and you can see, I guess here I'm in this side, but can you see on the far right side, that's the Shelby County, Tennessee marker. Our font is quite small. We have small font because we have quite a few names. And serving as a part of the Lynching Sites Project of Memphis, as well as there being another member who's been a part of that, Randy Gamble, who's here. That group has been instrumental in knowing and giving the names and the places so that we could give these names to the Memorial for Peace and Justice here. You walk down, you can see Susie here, you walk down and keep going down, and then you begin to look up because the markers have moved, they've not moved, but you've moved down and you're looking up. There's a beautiful, quiet kind of space to sit with water and a quotation around hope and courage. And then there is this. You go outside and there is a mark, there are horizontally, as you can tell, those are all the same markers. It's the twin to what was hanging. All are horizontal outside, because this is a project called the Remembrance Project that EJI is encouraging every county across the country to work together to bring their marker back to their county, to find a space by working in community. It can't be just one group or two groups saying we want it here. There's an application process, there's work to be done to show how a community and a county has worked together to find a place that works for many, so that this truth and these names can come home, and then that community can decide how they are going to display, honor, remember, and name. That's a quick overview, but that is Shelby County's, I think, again, which I took a picture of. So that project is in the works at this time. Any pilgrims want to say?
Well, I think we ought to recognize you. Oh,
It's on, but just close to your mouth.
okay. Well, our leaders were terrific, and Laura and Kate couldn't have done a better job. I think we'd all agree on that. And it was an amazing experience. Can you hear me now? Okay, is this close enough for two? Okay. It was a really amazing experience, and I think that the museum itself is overwhelming, and it's paradoxical in that it's horrible or horror in its messages, but inside the museum it's remarkable, the research that they've done and the vastness of the collection is wonderful. And it's quiet, and it was very, very emotional, and I think that once you looked around and you saw people went off by themselves, you didn't see a lot of groups in there or loud talking or anything like that. So it was an emotional day, and overwhelming in a lot of aspects. My second, I guess, favorite day was at the Church of the Good Shepherd. We started off and that was the best. That was the most hopeful experience, I think, of the whole day. We went to this lovely little church. Everybody was welcoming. They wanted us to stay, and we couldn't go because we had some time basis, but we did stay for church. And the music was terrific. It was a piano player who, had been there for a long time. She played the music that should have been there, that she should have. And the banners, here's my question, and I think I have photographs of these banners that were there. I think they were not commissioned, right?
They were. One of the art students at the nearby college is my memory.
Okay.
Alabama State.
Alabama State. Well, they were beautiful, sort of folk artish.
I don't have a picture of those.
I do. Mm-hmm. And I got online and looked them up, and anyway, that experience that day, probably because not only were the priest and his wife and the guests there, the parishioners there, they were so welcoming, but just the entire thing left me with hope. And that was what I thought was a good ending for the trip. You felt a sense of hopefulness in that church. That's it.
Thank you. Hope. Thank you. Yep, that was a special. We had some good church. I know y'all had the bishop here that day, but we had some good church where we were. Yep. All right. Thank you, Carol Ann. Okay. So this was and is the Freedom Monument Sculpture Park. Again, you can take a picture of that, beautiful art, but then from then on, you could not take any more pictures. And we made it just in time. It had opened, and then it was about to close for some renovation. So we had like one day before it closed the next day, right, gang? Yeah, I think that's the case. I want to show you this, and it's about 6 minutes. We might not get to watch it all. Maybe we will a little. But I think it's worth to show it because this is an incredible, incredible piece of what EJI has added. All right, Jeff, I'm going to hit play. And there's a commercial. I couldn't get it out, y'all. I tried. Everybody is supposed to drive a Ford after this, I guess. But I hear it just there. Okay. If anyone figures out how to get rid of advertisements, they're very sneaky. But here we go.
History books aren't the only way we learn from the past. Contributor Mark Whitaker.
So that gives you a little taste of the sculpture, the Freedom Monument Sculpture Park. And going back to that moment in the segment space where you were finding his name, they will help you find your name, your family's name, with all that you saw, how big it was. And it goes on to the back, too. But you can find names that way, too. It's really powerful and compelling. So that's what we have about the sculpture park. Anybody want to say anything about that? Right behind you, Melanie.
I would say that just this being in the location on the river made this so real. Just the, because when I think about slavery, I think about something distant. And when we were standing there, this was a beautiful spot on the river where I might want to go for a walk. And it was interesting that I had the same experience, a similar kind of experience at the Pettus Bridge. The ordinariness of that spot, just, it's a real place, a place you would encounter just walking out of your house, where these things happen. These things happen in real life. It gave it this sense of reality that was very provocative in my mind.
Thank you. Yep. And Stevenson talks about how compelling art can be to talk about hard truths, but naming the beauty as well as the brutality. So later that day, we went and kind of got a great tour by our wonderful tour guide, Ann Clemens, who kind of toured us around on the bus to different historic sites. Anybody recognize this bus station? Yep. This is the Freedom Riders bus station, and you can see Greyhound right there. And here's a picture a little closer of some of the Freedom Riders, and they have the pictures out of their police picture, or their jail picture rather. You can see James Lawson, John Lewis, but it goes the whole kind of wall, doesn't it, of the Greyhound bus station there. Brave people. So this is Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King served. If you recall, it was in Montgomery where he resided, and that's his house on the right. If you notice something about the windows, do you see a difference between the right side of windows, those two, versus the two on the far left? They're different, right? This is the one where his home where it was bombed in 1956. Thankfully, he and family we were told, further behind and back in the house, but those windows on the right do not match the ones on the left because they were blown out, and so is that front room. So, yep. We did not get to go in the church, but it is a living, breathing, active church, and it wasn't open at that time, but it was good to stand outside. It felt like some holy ground. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Anybody want to say anything? So this is Tuskegee. I mentioned that many of us went and visited Tuskegee University, and that's the outside. As we were pulling in, I couldn't resist group and pilgrims. I put, this is Lionel Richie's childhood home right here that is literally across the street from the entrance point. And I did have to smile. For those that do know who Lionel Richie is, the singer, when we were told by Ann that this is his childhood home and he had just been there for a concert, the entire bus went, hello, and broke into song. It was pretty great. So it was a good group of people were on this trip. We laughed and we cried together. You may know this, you may not, that Dr. George Washington Carver, or George W. Carver, and Dr. Booker T. Washington, their graves are both there at Tuskegee, and we spent some time at the grave site and with others, past presidents and other members who've been instrumental to Tuskegee there. It was a beautiful day, and we wandered and felt that holy ground too. I did not get a ton of great shots at Tuskegee, the national site where we had the museum and such, but I thought this was a pretty great picture of the plane. And they have planes there in the hangar that were actually flown by the airmen. There were videos and interviews by living members who've gotten, of course, much older, and many whom have died, but it was a strong time for many, and I wanted to make sure that I shared some words from Mary Layton, who could not be here. She had this to say about Tuskegee. Oh, yes. The Tuskegee Airman Historic Site was an unexpected treat that held great meaning for me, having heard of their feats and heroism over many decades. And I practically had chills walking through the campus and seeing tombstones of Booker T. Washington and George W. Carver. So it's a beautifully done museum for sure. And you can go and go into different rooms off of the hangar and see the airplane flight plans and hear what it took to be an airman and the level of discrimination that they were up against, and some of the powerful resistance that they did by being, for example, officers, and they were not allowed to have the full privilege of being officers as airmen because they were black and of color, and they were asked to sign something to say that they would give up those rights, and when they didn't and wouldn't sign, 115 of them were arrested for that. Didn't take too long before the powers that be realized they couldn't do a lot with these 100+ airmen now arrested. So they were released, but there was still ripple effects, and some were dishonorably discharged. And one was told that he was not only dishonorably discharged, but he also could no longer vote. And I believe it was President Clinton who restored his voting rights and gave him honor in his discharge, such too. So if you think about the years that came between that and what it took. So there's a lot of history there that I think people were not aware of, and some were, and it became deeper. So here's the Edmund Pettus Bridge that some of us were mentioning. We did watch, and we recommend it if you haven't seen it, the movie Selma as we drove down. And it was a good reminder of the 3 attempts of working towards voting rights in the march from Selma to Montgomery. What happened on Sunday, Bloody Sunday, and we've seen and know that history, many of us, and felt that in that sacred way as we walked. There's also the second attempt for those that weren't aware when they tried again, and it was called affectionately Turn Back Tuesday, because they did not go much further. But it was the third time, once they had full permission, and a judge had given permission in a way that gave them protection, that they walked from Selma to Montgomery. And I have some words from a few folk about this time too that I'll share. Let's see. And I put this up because you're seeing the river as they're walking across the bridge. You can see some of the pilgrims. They're looking out at that river. Finally, it was a most special moment to walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with visions of the civil rights activists facing uniformed officers with fire hoses. That is not ancient history. It is a vision that was as fresh that sunny Sunday I walked across the bridge as if it had been on the morning news. I felt deep sadness knowing that so much of what the marchers sought on Bloody Sunday still has yet to be achieved. Any thoughts from this group on Edmund Pettus? Okay. Then we just had some good hangout time in the hotel, and you can see some of our folk here. That's Ann Clemens on the left. And she was quite the storyteller, wouldn't you say, y'all? Yeah. She was a wonderful addition. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, talking, thinking, reflecting, getting ready to get on the bus. And that was our first dinner, and another good picture that way of seeing everybody. It was a good group. What else do we need to share for those that haven't shared and want to share about anything that's coming up? And then let's have a little bit of time left for Q&A.
Something we've already gone over, the Tuskegee Airmen. I'm a bit of a history buff, and I could make an argument that they got more respect from members of the Luftwaffe at times than they did their own army.
The level of discrimination within their own. Yep, it was real. Yep, thank you. Yep. Here's a Memphian, Ida B. Wells, and we use this quotation a lot at the Lynching Sites Project of Memphis, that the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth on them. We did a lot of turning lights on this trip, made some good friendships, and had meaningful time together. Saw some hard things, saw some beautiful things, and we kind of were left with each night, but each day thinking, so now what? So the group has been challenged and encouraged, and maybe even inspired, to figure out what the work looks like now, because it continues. We talked about Micah, Memphis Interfaith Coalition for Action and Hope. We talked about Sacred Ground, the 11-week gathering of thoughtful resources, readings, videos to learn about our history. We talked about the Heritage Research Committee that is taking place here, about learning about Grace St. Luke's own racial history, and delving into our archives and information that we have in those archives to learn more. That there's just more to be done, but we have to educate ourselves. So this was a strong place to begin, but not just to stay. One of the things, and I'm about to wrap things up and see if there are any more questions, but y'all seem very thoughtful, and I appreciate that. At the back table, I told you I would share a little bit about it. You have a few things. You have something that's called by Michelle Norris, because she started it, a race card. You have samples of what the pilgrims, no names on them, but what the pilgrims filled out as they drove down on their bus, on our bus. Michelle Norris created a project that kind of ballooned and blossomed and became this extraordinary project that went national. She made a card that said, race, your thoughts, 6 words, please send. So she just made these index cards with just those simple words and then spread them out, like in coffee shops and all that. I guess it had maybe her address on the back or something like that. People picked them up and in 6 words wrote some of the most compelling thoughts on what they had to say and thought about when it came to race. It's also really hard in 6 words to do that, right? But it served as a container. We did a version of that as we began our journey, right, on the bus. And people were asked, race, your thoughts, 6 words. And that was the beginning opener for our time with Compline and reflection as we shared space and held space together to reflect, to listen, to honor, to be sad together, to hold hope together, all of it. So I encourage you to look at these and see. I also encourage you to look at these. I picked these up from the museum because they allowed you to. They were pads. But these are some of the sample questions that in order to register to vote in this state, you must correctly answer the questions in this examination. On this one, there are 10. We were told that you had to do it within 3 minutes, and you had to get everyone right. And this was to qualify for voting if you were of color. There was also a poll tax. There were all these barriers that made it hard. One of the questions, how many jelly beans are in the jar in front of you? Draw 5 circles that have one common interlocking part. How may the county seat be changed under the Constitution of your state? What are the names of the persons who occupy the following offices in your county? Number 1, clerk of the Superior Court. 2, the ordinary. And 3, the sheriff. Yep, they go on and on and on. They were ridiculous questions, not, of course, easily answered, and it made voting even harder. So it's a tangible there that I wanted y'all to see. Oh, good. Okay, Carol Ann added some stuff to it. So spend some time if you'd like. But that's kind of our highlights in our time. Anybody want to share anything further? Okay. Ellen.
I'm at a point in it is a point in my life where I want to go deep into areas I had ignored. And one was this. So I've been on this kind of journey a while. But I had lunch with my cousins who lived in Montgomery, and I wanted to say this because they are very involved in the community. And they said that most of the community rejects what the Equal Justice Initiative is doing, and you ask them why, and they say, well, the story is so painful, and it's in the past. Why would we go back there? And yet Brian Stevenson is bringing in 500,000 tourists a year, and the economy is exploding. He's building hotels and all this, but the community won't talk about it.
Thank you, Ellen. There's a lot of work still to do. Yep, and there are ways to do that. So I shared a few here and there. Micah, Sacred Ground, heritage teams and such, and there's more to do. So. Facing history, facing ourselves. Thank you, Carol Ann. Yep. Randy.
Yeah, I'm Randy Gamble, one of the co-founders of the Legacy Site Project. I just want to say we are here. As I looked at that, or whatever it is, right, I remember in 2018 going to the opening summit when actually AGI first opened up, or whatever it is, right? This is hard work, but when you're doing it together, it makes it possible to do this journey together in faith, hope, and the greatest thing, of course, is love.
That's a lovely way and a powerful place to end. Thank you all. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.